She held on to one letter like it was a lifeline, but it nearly broke her instead. Maribelle Quinn lived in a house that creaked when the wind blew. It stood at the edge of town, quiet as a whisper and almost forgotten like her. She wasn't young anymore. Her hair had turned soft gray like morning mist, and her hands bore the lines of many years, years filled with cooking, praying, waiting, and loving people who were now gone. But even though her body was slower, her heart still hoped. It hoped for something more even at her age. Each morning, Maribelle swept the porch and watered the flower pot that barely bloomed. She read her Bible in the sunlight and hummed old hymns her mother once sang. She had no family left, but she wasn't lonely, not truly. She had faith. And sometimes faith feels like enough. But one day something new arrived. A letter. It came folded neat, carried in the hands of a neighbor boy who smiled and ran off before she could ask questions. Maribelle held it like it was a treasure. Her name was written in big, careful letters. Maribelle Quinn. It looked like it had come a long way. She sat at her little kitchen table, heart fluttering, and opened it. It was from a man named Thatcher Boone. A rancher from a place called Willow Ridge, way out west where the sky touched the earth and the roads were made of dust. He had read her ad in the back of a church paper, the one where she wrote, "God-fearing woman seeking a new beginning, ready to build a home with prayer and kindness." His letter was kind. He said he didn't care about looks or youth. He had a ranch but no one to share it with. He needed someone who could pray beside him, care for the home, and bring peace to the quiet. Maribelle held the paper to her chest. Maybe she thought God hadn't forgotten me after all. The next week a train ticket arrived. She packed her one good dress and a small Bible. The pastor's wife gave her a shawl. A girl from town tied her hair in a blue ribbon. Everyone said they were proud of her for being brave. She smiled. But deep down her hands trembled. She had never been west. She had never been someone's second chance. The train was long and loud. It roared across dry land and quiet towns. Maribelle looked out the window the whole time, whispering prayers and touching the letter folded in her apron. She memorized the words, especially the one that said, "If your heart is kind, I believe we'll get along just fine." She believed it. She had to. When the train stopped at Willow Ridge, the sun was high and hot. People moved fast, unloading bags and shouting names. Maribelle stepped onto the wooden platform with her head held high, her dress neatly pressed, and hope in her heart. She saw him right away. Thatcher Boone stood tall near a wagon, arms crossed, hat low over his eyes. His face looked strong and serious. She walked toward him with a small smile. "Mr. McCrae?" she asked. He looked at her, then blinked. "You're Maribelle?" "Yes," she said, smiling wider. "It's nice to finally meet you." But Thatcher didn't smile back. His eyes moved over her face, to her hands, her gray hair, her small suitcase. His jaw tightened. He looked like he had something to say, but the words didn't come. Then, after a long, hard pause, he said it. "I thought you'd be younger." The words hit like a sharp wind. Maribelle's smile faded, but she stood still. "I'm sorry," he added, not looking her in the eyes. I didn't expect someone like you." "I'm still the same woman who wrote the letter," she said softly. But he shook his head. This was a mistake. He turned and walked away. Maribelle was left standing alone with her bag and her Bible, while people rushed past and the wind tugged at her skirt. She didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, she closed her eyes and whispered, "Lord, I trust you still. Even now." Because she did. Even when a man turned away, God never did. He left her standing in the dust, but God made sure she didn't fall. Maribelle Quinn didn't chase after the man who walked away. She just stood there for a moment, holding her bag and her Bible, letting the wind dry the sting in her eyes. She'd hoped for welcome, maybe even a handshake. But all she got was silence and a heavy heart. The platform slowly emptied. Wagons rolled off. Children laughed as they ran across the dirt road. And there she was, still standing. Still waiting. But for what, she didn't know. A kind voice broke through the quiet. "Are you lost, dear?" Maribelle turned to see an older woman with flour on her apron and warm eyes full of concern. She held a small basket of fresh bread and wore a bonnet a little crooked on her head. "I reckon you're new in town," the woman said. Maribelle nodded gently. "I suppose I am. I'm Mabel Jensen. I run the bakery just around the corner," she said. "You look like someone in need of a seat, some bread, and maybe a bit of kindness." Maribelle smiled, even though her heart was still heavy. "That would be lovely, thank you." The bakery smelled like cinnamon and safety. It was a narrow little shop with white curtains and wooden floors that squeaked when you stepped just right. Mabel sat her down at a small table in the corner and poured a glass of lemonade. You waiting on someone? She asked gently. I was, Maribelle said softly. But I think he changed his mind. Mabel didn't pry. She simply nodded like a woman who had seen heartbreak before. Well, the upstairs room's empty. Got a little bed, a wash basin, and a window that catches the sunrise. You're welcome to it. Maribelle blinked, surprised. You don't even know me. I know a woman who carries herself with grace when she's been let down, Mabel replied. That's enough for me. Maribelle moved into the room that evening. It wasn't large, but it was clean and peaceful. She unpacked her Bible, her brush, and one photograph of her parents when they were young. Then she sat by the window and watched the sun dip behind the hills. She didn't write a letter back home. She didn't cry. She just prayed. Lord, she whispered, I thought I came here to be a wife. But maybe I came here just to trust you more. Days passed. Then a week. And still no word from Thatcher Boone. Mabel gave Maribelle little jobs in the shop. Kneading dough, dusting shelves, reading scripture to the children while cookies cooled on the windowsill. The townsfolk began to notice her gentle spirit. The pastor's wife asked if she could help teach Sunday school. A lonely widow stopped by just to hear Maribelle pray. She wasn't the bride anyone expected, but she was becoming the blessing no one knew they needed. Still, at night, when the bakery was quiet and the sky turned navy blue, Maribelle sometimes thought of the man who turned her away. She wondered if he ever thought of her. She wondered if he felt regret. She wondered if he prayed at all. One morning, Mabel walked into the kitchen with a strange look on her face. She held a note in her hand. This came by Ryder, she said, handing it to Maribelle. The handwriting was bold and rushed. Miss Quinn, I believe I owe you an apology. If you'll allow it, I'd like to explain myself. Thatcher Boone. Maribelle stared at the paper. She didn't know what he would say. But she knew one thing for sure. God had sent her here for a reason, and maybe that reason hadn't even begun to show itself yet. He had turned her away once, but this time he came to her. Maribelle folded the note and placed it on her nightstand. She didn't rush to answer it. She prayed about it first. The letter had come as a surprise, and with it, a swirl of feelings, confusion, hesitation, maybe even a flicker of hope. But she had learned over the years not to chase feelings. She listened for God's voice instead. For 3 days she said nothing. And then, on the 4th day, as the morning light spilled across the bakery floor, she heard footsteps on the stairs. Not Mabel's. Heavy, slow, unsure. She turned toward the doorway just as a shadow stretched across the threshold. There he stood. Thatcher Boone. His hat was in his hands. His face looked tired. His boots were dusty. But it was his eyes, those deep-set, storm-colored eyes, that told her he had been carrying something heavy. Miss Quinn, he said quietly. Maribelle didn't speak right away. She simply stood, tall and still, like the oak tree near her childhood church, weathered but rooted. I didn't come to make excuses, he continued. I came to ask your forgiveness. She gave a small nod, her hands folded gently in front of her. I was wrong, he said. When I saw you at the train, all I could think about was how different you looked from what I pictured. I let my pride speak louder than my heart. Maribelle's voice was soft but clear. And what does your heart say now? He took a deep breath. It says I was a fool. That age doesn't make a woman less worthy. That kindness and faith are exactly what I need in my life. I just didn't realize it soon enough. There was a pause. She motioned for him to sit. They talked. Not like strangers anymore, but like two people who'd both been humbled. He told her about his ranch, about the empty rooms and the long days. He spoke of his mother who had passed, of how he had prayed for someone who could bring life back to the home. Maribelle listened. Then she spoke, not about pain but about grace. About how sometimes God lets us trip so we can learn how to walk again, with Him. I don't know what your plans are now, he said at last, his voice low. But if there's even the smallest chance you'd come see the ranch, I'd be honored to show it to you. Maribelle looked out the window. The sky was blue. The day was quiet. And in her heart she heard that still, small voice. Go. She turned back to him with a soft smile. All right, Mr. Boone. Let's see this ranch of yours. He stood, surprised. You mean it? I do, she said. But this time I won't be arriving as your bride. Just as myself. And that, he said with a slow smile of his own, is exactly who I hope to meet. She returned not as a bride, but as a woman with quiet strength and a heart full of faith. The next morning, Thatcher Boone arrived at the bakery with a wagon. He had brushed the dust from his coat, combed his hair, and brought a basket of fresh apples tied in a blue cloth. He said they were from the orchard behind the barn, his way of saying thank you. Maribelle stepped into the wagon slowly, steadying herself. She had not come to impress anyone. Her dress was plain. Her hands were strong from kneading dough. But her face held peace, and Thatcher noticed. The road to the ranch was long, winding between golden fields and sleepy hills. They didn't speak much at first. But the silence wasn't heavy anymore. It felt gentle. After a while he said, "I was raised out here. This land's been in the Boone family for 3 generations." Maribelle nodded. "It's quiet. Peaceful. It used to feel lonely," he admitted. "But today it doesn't." When they reached the ranch, Maribelle saw it wasn't large or fancy. It was weathered like her, edges worn by time but still standing, still useful. The barn leaned a little. The porch had a missing board. But the field stretched wide and the sky overhead was clear and kind. Thatcher led her inside. The house smelled of pine wood and old memories. A table sat in the center of the room, a Bible resting at one end open to Psalms. A photograph of a woman, his mother, hung above the fireplace. Her face was kind. "I cleaned as best I could," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "But it could use a woman's touch." Maribelle smiled. "What it needs is love, not lace." He showed her the kitchen, the root cellar, and the small back garden where wild mint grew between rows of beans. She noticed the quiet way he walked, like a man used to carrying burdens alone. Then in the sitting room something caught her eye. A wooden box sat beside the fireplace. Carved into the top were the words, "If I fall, let me fall into grace." Maribelle bent down and opened it gently. Inside were letters. Dozens of them. Her letters. Every word she had written during those early weeks, they were all there. Worn at the edges but kept. "You didn't throw them away," she said softly. He stood behind her, voice thick. "I read them. Over and over. Even after I turned you away, I couldn't let them go." She placed the lid back on gently. "Why?" "Because they reminded me of the man I wanted to be," he said. "And the woman I was too blind to welcome." They sat on the porch as evening fell. Maribelle looked out at the hills turning gold in the fading light. Thatcher sat beside her, hands clasped, elbows on his knees. "I'm not asking for your hand," he said. "Not yet. I just want you to know, you're welcome here. Not because I pity you, but because I see you now." Maribelle's voice was steady. "And what do you see?" He turned to her. "A woman God sent to remind me what grace looks like. A woman strong enough to forgive. Brave enough to begin again." The wind stirred. Maribelle tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear and whispered, "Then let's begin again." She didn't come to stay, but her presence was already changing everything. Maribelle didn't unpack her bag. She set it beside the guest bed and folded her shawl over the back of a chair. She hadn't agreed to be a wife, only to visit. But even as she walked through the small rooms of Thatcher's home, it felt less like visiting, and more like planting a seed. The next morning she rose early just as the sky turned pale with dawn. She found the kitchen quiet, the stove cold, the flour bin nearly empty. But there were eggs in a basket by the door and milk in a jar beside it. She cooked breakfast as sunlight streamed through the window, simple cornbread, eggs, and warm tea. Thatcher walked in just as she placed the plate on the table. He stopped short. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know," she replied. "But I wanted to." They ate in silence at first, the only sound the creak of old floorboards and birds calling outside. Then he spoke. "There's a spot out back I've been trying to clear. I could use help pulling some of the brush." Maribelle nodded. "You show me where." "You sure?" She smiled. "I've worked in gardens since I was 10. I think I can handle a few stubborn weeds." The work was slow but steady. They dug side by side, pulling roots, tossing stones, sweating beneath the sun. Thatcher noticed how Maribelle hummed hymns as she worked, soft tunes his mother used to sing. He hadn't heard that sound in years and it stirred something inside him. When she wiped her brow and smiled at him, it wasn't flirtation. It was kindness. Pure and simple. "You work hard," he said. "So do you," she replied. "But you carry more than just tools." He looked at her, startled. "You carry regret," she said gently. "But you don't have to hold it alone." That night, after supper, Thatcher took out his guitar. It was dusty and missing a string, but he tuned it anyway. He sang a slow song, about mercy, about home, about second chances. Maribelle listened from the porch, eyes closed, the cool wind brushing her cheek. When the song ended, she clapped once, softly. "You've got a voice," she said. He shrugged. "It only comes out when no one's listening." She smiled. "Then I'm honored you sang anyway." As the stars blinked to life above them, they sat side by side on the porch once more. They didn't talk about the past. They didn't rush into promises. They just shared the silence, and it was enough. Maribelle had come with nothing but a suitcase and a bruised heart. But in the quiet of that evening she felt something she hadn't known in years. Belonging. She didn't know his past, but what he carried could change everything. A few days later, Thatcher asked Maribelle to walk with him. The sky was clear, the wind gentle, and the sun painted golden patches through the trees. He didn't say where they were going, only that he wanted her to see something. They walked past the barn, past the small orchard where apples hung low and sweet, and toward the edge of the land where the grass grew wild. At the top of a small hill stood a tree. It was old, thick-trunked and wide-branched, with bark like folded pages of an old book. This was her favorite spot, Thatcher said. Your mother? He nodded slowly. She used to sit here every Sunday after church. Said she could hear the Lord best under this tree. Maribelle ran her hand over the bark. It's beautiful. She planted that rose bush, he added, pointing to a bloom at the base of the tree. Said every home needs something soft beside something strong. They sat beneath the tree for a long while. Thatcher pulled a small wooden box from his coat. Inside was a folded letter. Yellowed at the corners. She wrote this for me before she passed, he said. I've never read it. I wasn't ready. He held it out to Maribelle. I think, maybe you should. Maribelle took the letter gently and opened it. The handwriting was delicate but sure. My dear boy, if you're reading this, I know you're hurting. But pain doesn't get the last word. Grace does. Don't close your heart when it feels bruised, open it wider. Let someone in. The right woman won't come to fix you. She'll come to walk beside you. And together you'll both grow. Love her with patience. Trust God with your fears. And when in doubt, come sit under this tree. I'll always be near. Mama. Maribelle blinked back tears. Thatcher wiped his face roughly with his sleeve. I've been so afraid, he whispered. Afraid I wasn't ready. Afraid I'd fail again. You don't have to be perfect, she said gently. You just have to be willing. They didn't speak much after that. But something had changed. Thatcher wasn't just letting her into his home anymore. He was letting her into his story. And for the first time, Maribelle felt the ground beneath her shift, not like it was crumbling but like it was finally settling firm beneath her feet. As they walked back toward the house, Thatcher stopped. Would you stay for supper again? He asked. She smiled. Only if I can make the biscuits. He laughed. That's the best offer I've had all week. She never thought she'd wear it again, but the Lord had other plans. Sunday came with the smell of warm earth and sunlit clouds. Maribelle rose before dawn, just as she always had, and laid out her best dress, the soft blue one with tiny white flowers stitched along the hem. It had been her mother's. She wore it only on Sundays or on days she wanted to feel especially close to heaven. She brushed her hair slowly, tied it back with a ribbon, and stood before the mirror. You're not the girl who arrived at the train station, she whispered to her reflection. You're the woman God didn't give up on. When she stepped outside, Thatcher was waiting beside the wagon, wearing a freshly pressed shirt and a look that was somewhere between nervous and proud. You look, he paused. You look like answered prayer. Maribelle smiled. And you look like a man trying to get to church on time. He chuckled and offered his hand to help her up. The little church sat on the edge of town, white wood walls, one bell in the tower, and a row of worn pews inside. As they walked through the doors, the chatter stopped. People turned. Eyes widened. A few whispered. They remembered her. The woman who was sent away. Thatcher noticed the stares and clenched his jaw. Maribelle, however, simply straightened her back, walked to the front row, and took a seat. Her head bowed. Her lips moved in silent prayer. Not for approval. For peace. The preacher spoke of Ruth that morning. Of how she stayed when she could have gone. Of how her faith, not her youth, made her beautiful in God's eyes. Thatcher didn't take his eyes off Maribelle the whole time. And when the last hymn rang through the church, something in him settled. He didn't care what people thought. He cared what she meant. After the service, an older woman approached Maribelle by the steps. Her name was Mrs. Bramble. She had raised 5 boys and lost 2 to war. I remember you, she said. You came here with hope and were turned away. Maribelle nodded. Mrs. Bramble looked over at Thatcher. Sometimes it takes a man a little longer to hear the Lord than it does a woman. Then she smiled and slipped a small bundle into Maribelle's hands. It's just peach jam. You'll need it for biscuits. Maribelle blinked back grateful tears. Thank you, she whispered. As they rode home, Thatcher was quiet. But just before they reached the house, he pulled the wagon to a stop. I know you came back to visit, he said softly. But this place already feels different. Because of you. She looked at him. And for the first time he reached for her hand. Not to take it. To hold it. Maribelle didn't pull away. It wasn't the fence that needed mending, it was the distance between two hearts. The morning after church, Thatcher found the back fence broken. A storm had passed through in the night, and one of the wooden posts had split clean in half. Cattle tracks ran across the edge of the field. Looks like they got out, he muttered. I'll help you fix it, Maribelle offered without pause. Thatcher turned. You sure? She was already pulling on her boots. They worked for hours. Hammering in silence. Holding the new post steady. Pulling wire taut. Sweat gathered at their brows and dust clung to their arms. But they didn't complain. They worked like people who'd been quiet for too long and had finally found comfort in shared purpose. As they took a break under the shade of the oak trees, Thatcher handed her a tin cup of water. You've been a blessing here, he said. Maribelle looked down. I didn't come here expecting to change anything. Well, he said slowly, you have. You've changed me. She looked at him then really looked. He wasn't the man who had turned her away at the station. He was softer now. Slower to speak. Quicker to listen. She reached out, brushing a speck of dust from his sleeve. I see you trying. And I'm proud of you. Later, as they finished tying the last wire, Maribelle caught her hand on a nail. Thatcher was at her side in a second. It's just a scratch, she said. But he took her hand gently, wrapping it in his kerchief. You've bled enough in your life, he said quietly. Let me protect you now. She didn't pull away. She let him bandage her hand not just for the scrape, but for every place in her heart that had been left untended. That evening after supper, they walked out to the front porch as the sun dipped low. Thatcher turned to her. I never asked what you prayed for at church. Maribelle thought for a moment then smiled. I prayed that whatever door God opened, I'd be brave enough to walk through it. And do you think he's opening one now? He asked. She looked out at the field, the sky, the quiet home behind her. Yes, she said. I think he is. He had no ring. She had no family. But what they shared beneath that tree was forever. The willow tree at the back of the homestead had always swayed softly in the breeze, like it was listening to heaven's whispers. It was there, one golden evening, that Thatcher brought Maribelle with something folded in his hand. It wasn't a ring box. It was a piece of paper. A simple vow. Written in his own careful hand. He cleared his throat and read aloud. I once thought a man had to be strong to be worthy. But you showed me real strength is kindness. I once thought love had to look a certain way. But you showed me love wears aprons and hauls fence posts. Maribelle, I don't have riches and I've made mistakes. But if you'll have me, I'll be yours for as long as God gives me breath. Maribelle didn't speak. She just pulled a small, worn Bible from her pocket. Opened to a marked page. And read softly. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It keeps no record of wrongs. Then she looked up, tears in her eyes. I do, she whispered. They married that very evening, under the willow with the chickens for witnesses and the wind as their hymn. Mrs. Bramble baked a pie. The preacher came late but not too late. And as the sun dipped low, Thatcher kissed Maribelle's hand and said, I didn't just marry a woman. I married the answer to every prayer I didn't know how to pray. And so, the woman they once sent away became the heart of the home no one wanted to leave. Sometimes God closes one door, so he can open the gate to something better. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more soul-stirring Western tales of grace and redemption. Your support keeps these stories alive.